1982 starts in Beirut, in fact. He didn't stay long in Egypt. He moved to Beirut, and he joined the PLO in 1972. And he had a number of jobs, especially in research, and he was the head of the Palestine Research Center. So he remained in Beirut for the next 10 years. He became close associate or friend to Yasser Arafat and the PLO leadership until 1982. In fact, Darwish did remain in Beirut even after the withdrawal of the PLO, but felt unsafe after the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, and he managed to leave with Libyan diplomats, but dressed in disguise as a priest. So in Beirut, that is where the maturity of a poetic experience took place, in fact. He lived 10 years, and there were majestic development in reference to the Palestinian cause. So the civil war in Lebanon, the massacre of Tel el-Za'atar, the Earth Day in Palestine 78, the recognition of the PLO by many states, the Israeli incursion in 1982 and the occupation of Beirut for a short period, the Sabra and Shatila massacre, 16 to 18 September, and in Beirut he started a new style of longer poems and sophisticated style, avoided direct expression and started developing his distinct style and poetic language. His fame expanded. That's a picture when he was in Beirut, young and next to the PLO leader. And that's Osama al-Bazi from Egypt. So during this period, he published many books and long poems. I Love You Not, 1972, A Soldier Dreaming of White Lilies, 73, and a long poem, Ahmed al-Za'atar, 1976, which is a long relic to commemorate the attack on the refugee camp named Tel el-Za'atar. And another collection called Aras, or Weddings, an Ode to Beirut, 1981. But one of the most famous poems he wrote is Madih al-Dhil al-Aal, in praise of the tall shadow, 1983. It's a long poem talking about the experience of people in Beirut under Israeli incursion in 1982. It's really a beautiful poem, which is it's like kind of a day-to-day life under the bombardment. And in Beirut also he met his longtime friend Marcel Khalifa, the singer. And Marcel Khalifa is a serious, innovative nationalist singer who befriended Darwish, and they became duet. One writes and the other sings. Most famous song, I am longing for the bread of my mother and the coffee made by my mother. Childhood grew in me, and now I love my life, because if I die, I will be embarrassed of the tears coming from my mother's eyes. That's one of his songs. Another song which brought some criticism, his song, Ana Yusuf ya Akhi, ya Abi, I am Yusuf, referring to Prophet Joseph. And he made similarities between Joseph and his brother who betrayed him, making Joseph like the Palestinian who betrayed by his Arab brother. So, in fact, Islamic groups were very annoyed with that poem, with that song. After Beirut, he moved to Paris, and that we could call that stage 3 now. So he departed from his beloved city, Beirut. In fact, he loved Beirut more than any city in his life. And he settled in Paris and started publishing a magazine, famous one called Al-Karmel. Although he became a member of the PLO Executive Committee in '87 and helped in drafting the Palestinian Declaration of Statehood in 1988, but he tried to keep away from factionalism politics. He said, I am a poet with a particular perspective on reality. He even didn't want to become a member of the PLO. In fact, he heard it in the news, and his next article, he wrote, my final discourse before resignation, that immediately, that after he was appointed. And he lived in Paris during this period. He used to go frequently to Tunisia, where they headquartered the PLO, and he developed his poetic style to become just a renowned poet, a global poet. Not a poet of the resistance, not a national poet of the Palestinian question, but just simply a word poet. His themes varied. He used more philosophical, epical, and historical references. He read world greatest poets, French, Greek, English. He expanded his horizon at every direction in Paris. So he resigned his PLO post in 1993 following the signing of the Oslo Accord in September 13, 1993. That freed his hand to focus on expanding his intellect and develop his distinct, beautiful poetry. So in Paris, he published these collections: Tragedy of the Daffodils, Comedy of Silver, I See What I Want, 11 Planets, Les Roses, Sarir al-Ghariba, The Bed of a Stranger, Why You Have Left the Horse Alone, the prose, al-Rasa'il, the messages between him and his friend Samih al-Qasim. It's a beautiful collection of correspondence between him and his friend Samih al-Qasim. So in 1995, Mahmoud Darwish decided to leave Paris and come back to the Arab world. So he chose the city of Amman. It was closer to Palestine for him, and he resided there until his death for 13 years. He was also permitted by the Israeli authorities to maintain a residence in Ramallah as of 1996. So in Amman, his final stage, he maintained a line of poetry beauty, of a distinct talent of himself. But he tried to distance, to get away a little bit from Palestine. He became more tolerant, written a number of poems humanizing the enemy, the Israeli soldier. He was attacked by a number of critics, saying that he's giving up, he's changing his skin in order to allow the Israeli to let him in. That some of the critics said. But he wrote that famous poem, it's called Al-Jidariya, the war poem in 2000, a philosophical monologue with death after his heart surgery in 1998. And he wrote also A State of Siege, 2002. So he wrote also, Don't apologize for it you have done, same as almond flowers, in the presence of absence, and his last collection, The Effect of the Butterfly, that is his last collection. And his last poem is called The Backgammon Player. He said, it's my good fortune that I sleep alone and that I listen to my body and believe my talent in discovering pain in time to call the doctor. 10 minutes before dying, 10 minutes, enough for me to live by chance and disappoint the void. Who am I to disappoint the void? Who am I? Who am I? Apparently he was feeling his death coming so close. He wrote that in July of 2009. He has this problem with his heart. 1984, the first treatment in Vienna. 1998, open heart surgery in Paris. And he wrote his long poem, the Jidariya, which as I mentioned. And in July 2008, he was told that he must go into another open heart surgery. He wrote his last poem, The Backgammon Player, in which he predicted his death. He raised the white flag, but he felt he was not defeated. He tried to be just a poet. Darwish did not want to be the Palestinian national poet. He did not want to be a political poet at all, but a lyrical one, a poet of philosophy and human love. But every time he turned in this direction, the long arm of Palestinian fate, sufferings, and struggle dragged him back. And Darwish also was able to unite, and he succeeded in uniting all Palestinian factions. There were so many fractured Palestinian groups. And in the West Bank, Gaza, in Israel, in the refugee camp, and throughout the diaspora, he belonged to all of them. The refugees could identify with him because he was a refugee. Palestinian citizens also could identify with him because he was one of them. And the inhabitants of the occupied Palestinian territories also identify with him because he was a fighter against oppression and occupation. Many friends from around the world, this is some of those guests, they visited him. In Beirut Book Fair 2007, people will be lining and taking picture with him. And when he went back to Haifa after 36 years, he did a reciting there with a full audience in the largest hall in Haifa. He got so many awards. Some people said that he deserved to get the Nobel, but apparently he didn't live long enough to get it. This is a good quote by an Israeli peace activist. He said, he was the poet of anger, of longing, of hope, and of peace. These were the strings of his violin, Yuri Avniri, Israeli peace activist. On Saturday, August 9, 2008, he died while under an open heart surgery in Houston, Texas. His body was flown in a private plane dispatched by President Khalifa of the United